Welcome to this presentation, which captures the voices and concerns of 7 citizens representing many people in a rapidly growing awakening movement. It is a movement which is occurring across the region, nation and world at this time. This first meeting, held with 4 council officers on the 31st of January 2023, focused on emergency planning, in particular the Torbay Climate Emergency Action Plan. The meeting was kindly offered and hosted by David, the Director of Planning, Housing and Climate Emergency for Torbay Council. Previously, he recognised that there was no platform for the concerns of this movement to be heard. And at the outset of this meeting, David expressed his team's intention to listen. At the beginning of the meeting, we outlined that our intention is to support and work with the Council, its officers and wider community in order to avert a major catastrophe. We strongly feel that the Torbay Climate Emergency Action Plan will result in impoverished regional community, diminished standards of living and loss of property, loss of human rights and freedom of movement, social and economic upheaval, considerable human harm. This is not necessary. And this is the sentiment of the 200 or so informed citizens peacefully gathered outside the council building in solidarity and support of this meeting. We summarised our position as that we do not believe that there is a climate emergency. There are too many funding compromised independent scientists being cancelled, censored and suppressed. Accelerated CO2 reduction measures will have little benefit and will likely result in considerable human, economic and social harm that may indeed last for generations. It is clear that something is not right, and to articulate our concerns, we have prepared 5 short presentations. So with this, I will hand you over to our first presenter, Gresham.
Good evening, I'm Gresham, a retired property developer and designer, but more importantly, just a concerned tax-paying citizen. In fact, so concerned, I now find myself here tonight amongst only part of a vast consortium of other concerned tax-paying citizens and lay people. My concerns are as follows. I have just read your consultation draft for Torbay's Climate Action Plan, and even though I may be on board with some of its objectives, there are others that leave me bewildered as to how you ever hope to achieve them, and certainly within the timescale you plan, without impacting our human rights to standard of living and freedom of movement. In particular, from your objectives list, page 4, Number 1, new energy technologies in all homes, which means heat pumps. Without gas-powered heating, what grid and infrastructure is going to supply this additional electric power at such short notice? It would need 100% more grid power at an estimated £2 trillion UK-wide. Due to our weather, the only choice for base power supply will still be gas, coal or atomic, not solar or wind. Who's going to pay for such costly home installations, estimated £2 to £4 trillion UK-wide? Us or local, national government with grants? I know the costs involved, having done it on my own property developments. No, I think not, and not within the allotted timescale stated, due to an impending economic recession about to engulf the UK, and even then it will only be with the very same taxes just taken from us. Number 3, reduction in the need to travel. Many of us will never be able to reduce the need for our present personal transport just by shifting to so-called sustainable or public transport options. We're often older blue badge holders or mums with family. We must not be pressured into doing so by financial penalties either, as that too would reduce our mobility and freedom. Number 4, reduce emissions from vehicles, which must surely be code for using new electric cars. Many of us will not be able to afford electric vehicles early enough, and especially if these measures proposed need accelerating on your timescale. In other words, this initial thin end of the wedge may be nothing in comparison to the fat end in only a matter of a couple of years. We would also be left with the glaring problems of electric vehicles, battery material mining problems, high initial manufacturing pollution, inadequate grid supply for charging. It would need 70% more grid power. Fire safety issues, limited travel capacity, stranded vehicles, short battery life, the inability to recycle these batteries. All this urgency is based on one-sided spurious data and hypothetical modelling of a planet about to burst into flames after having had millions of years of consistently fluctuating climate, which leaves me feeling that this may be nothing more than the beginning of a climate lockdown for a dystopian controlled future. Yes, the science is not settled until such time as the vast majority of not only government-funded but also thousands of censored independent scientists concur. Somewhere in this hierarchical government command chain, some local authority has got to start pushing back against this madness, and it needs to be you. If not, it will most certainly be us, the concerned citizens. Of course, there are other ways to achieve these demands put upon you from above, and that would be by simply working with interest groups like us from bottom up, rather than just from top-down directives. My rightful request as a council tax-paying citizen is that you lay out exactly, completely, transparently, and in detail how you intend to achieve these ambitious plans so as to avert this unproven so-called emergency without eroding our unalienable human rights, and do so, please, before voting on your proposals. Thank you for this opportunity to speak.
Hello, my name is Julie. I was the lady who found the original email on the Devon Carbon Plan in December 2022. I immediately replied, I would like to speak. And when that evening arrived, I was really nervous and I thought, why have I put myself in this situation? But someone had to stand up and say something. My questions didn't directly get answered. I received a 400-page government document with 3 links that didn't open, and the questions have still not gone away. Before moving to Devon, I managed a substantial commercial photography studio. And on moving to Devon, I set up a property marketing business, applying professional photography, floor plans, and surveying properties for energy efficiency. I built up a good customer base, and I worked 2 days a week in a nursing home. During COVID, I lost my business, and I was fired immediately from my care job for refusing a swab which was being inserted into the back of the nose, so close to the blood-brain barrier. This was a procedure that I didn't want done once or twice a week. I thought it was dangerous and something that shouldn't be done so frequently. I lost my job immediately. When I saw the Devon Carbon Plan, I instantly thought how alarming it is. This plan does not serve the people. It has similarities to COVID lockdown. It's an infringement on our freedom of movement. During COVID and working in a nursing home, I witnessed the immense sadness that travel restrictions brought to the elderly not seeing their family and friends, and the dystopia of being given a letter by my employer allowing me to travel to work. Now, what's to stop a 20-minute neighbourhood becoming a 15, a 10 or a 5-minute neighbourhood? Remember in 2020 we were told, follow the science. It's 2 weeks to flatten the curve. Well, we're now in 2023 and we're still following a science, and we're looking at something that looks like a lockdown, but it seems to be cloaking itself in a 20-minute neighbourhood. The similarities to COVID cannot be a coincidence, and this has to be questioned. For back in 2020, I lost a life I once knew, and now I have the right, and I will question the science.
My name's Lee, and I've lived in Torbay for 23 years. I'm a mother, a grandmother, and I am concerned about their future, as I am about all the other residents of Torbay. Like my friend Julie, I have been a previous business owner, and also like my friend Julie, the restrictions that were placed upon us during the latest pandemic emergency crisis caused my early retirement. The reason for this background is to demonstrate that, like many other people, I'm a concerned resident on what is potentially a rush plan without proper consultation with the residents of Torbay, in the same way as the recent emergency crisis. I understand the damage that the Devon Carbon Plan could have on people's ability to keep their businesses thriving and therefore keeping Torbay's employment levels from declining. I'm so impassioned about this potential poverty and harm that it has moved me to seriously consider standing for council this upcoming May elections alongside my friend Jane. This I've discussed with various other residents and business owners in Torbay to gauge their thoughts on this matter. Since being early retired, I've had time to research, collate and collect arguments from both sides, and I will continue to do so as I'm not committed to working currently. While speaking to businesses and residents, 70 other people have also expressed that they will seriously consider running this May, just with the points that have been made. I agree with everything else that my friends have expressed in their representations to you. I also have other concerns in the Devon Carbon Plan. They have proposed to place a levy on tourists in Devon, which, as you know, is the biggest income to the local economy. This would have a detrimental and lasting effect on tourism and the local economy for the future generations. This should be the biggest driver for you to reject the Devon Carbon Plan in its current format until a full, open and honest discussion has taken place with residents and business owners to discuss this potential life-changing plan. My biggest question from myself to you, as I feel I'm speaking on behalf of the residents, they wish, as do I, that under the Freedom of Information Act, we would like the exact document being voted on the 18th of April 2023, and also each document to do with the Devon Carbon Plan going forward. The collective immediate concerns that the majority of residents and business owners that I have spoke to want answering is the impact on their standard of living and their freedom of movement with the choice of how they choose to do this. The major concerns that I'm being told are the implementation of freedom of movement barriers, such as enforced CCTV in residential areas, face recognition, barriers and road closures on roads. Number plate recognition, restrictions on ownership of motor vehicles, whether they are petrol, diesel, LPG, electric or indeed hydrogen. Tracking residents and settlements being proposed without consultation with the residents. I would therefore advise the council to include the residents in discussing any future carbon plans, as people are telling me that they are angry about these proposals and therefore are coming together to formulate plans going forward. A statement from the council that restriction of movement is not going to proceed would be a good start.
My name is Glyn, and I am an independent strategic advisor with 2 decades of experience in organisation, transformation, design and development, founded upon an earlier career as a professional chartered engineer with a master's qualification in engineering management. I have experience operating internationally in local, regional and national contexts in both the public and private sectors. My relationship with Torbay goes back 25 years, and I am deeply concerned about the policy and approach being developed and expressed through the Torbay Climate Emergency Action Plan, and indeed the elevation of the accompanying portfolio of projects and programmes to emergency strategic status. Torbay Council declared a climate emergency in 2019, and the gravity of the situation required an accelerated, rapid plan of action to reduce CO2 to become carbon neutral by 2030. Climate is not my area of speciality, and in the past month or so I've had to bring myself up to speed with the issues and the subject itself. As a practicing strategic advisor, in such situations I seek out informed and independent sources, and it turns out that many independent scientists and experts refute climate crisis and sternly warn against carbon reduction policies. I have found that the most useful and accessible source of information is a series of long-form interviews by Professor Jordan Peterson, the outspoken clinical psychologist, author and thought leader. He has recently held a series of interviews with experts that explain the complexities of client science, the history and the systemic problems across academia, blighted by bias and distortions promoted by funded research, used as leverage for political and economic agendas. For any decision maker on climate-related policy, as due diligence, I would strongly recommend the series of deeply informed interviews that can be found easily on YouTube. A clear message emerges. There is an institutional breakdown in independent advisory across science, academia, policy and strategy making. So my area of specialism is strategic advisory in transformation of organisation and management. So subsequent to the 2008 economic crisis and in a post-COVID environment, the strategic environment has now become highly complex, ambiguous, volatile and uncertain. To deal effectively with this sort of environment, we have to develop approaches that treat potentially conflicting top-down and bottom-up drivers and agendas, integrating also a capability of embracing polarised narratives without bias. So using the metaphor of a car that is now required to drive off-road, it will not be fit for purpose unless it has a four-wheel drive system and the drivers retrained and upskilled to operate in a more complex driving conditions. Similarly, present organisation practices need to be upgraded to better cope with the challenges and the complexities of the current post-COVID-19 environment. It is likely that the present council planning systems and structures hold a fundamental systemic threat to the well-being of the region, the economy and the citizens. So what might the absence of this system upgrade look like? Well, perhaps the adoption of misguided and unnecessary policy regarding climate emergency and CO2 reduction that have the potential of causing significant harm to the well-being of the region and its people. Also, as shown by the flagship case study highlighted in the Torbay Climate Emergency Action Plan, where 1.8 million public money was spent on decarbonisation of the leisure centre, opened in 2022, citing a return on economic investment of 200 years. So for a moment, consider the sensitivity of this. As we now live in a post-COVID environment where more people are relying on food banks, energy costs have skyrocketed, the health system is collapsing, people and businesses are struggling to make ends meet. Is this really where the emergency is? Is this where the energy of the council is best directed? Does the heating system of the local leisure centre really constitute an emergency intervention? This clearly highlights issues around value management, emergency prioritisation, strategic direction, purpose and decision making. So not spotting and intervening with these wayward strategies and policy making is an indication of blind spots and breakdown in advisory, organisation design and effectiveness. I will leave you with what may become a defining question in the coming years. That is, how may we better treat polarised and clashing perspectives in strategic planning?
97% of scientists say there's climate change, it's caused by man, and that it is dangerous. I'm sure we've all heard this, and I would like to explain to you where this came from. It's from a poll taken in 2008 by Dawn Zimmerman, who asked 10,000 or so scientists online 2 questions. Compared with pre-1800 levels, has it warmed? And has human activity played a significant role? About 3,000 responded, many saying yes to both. And many actually saying, well, define significant. What does it mean? 20%, 30%, 60%? It varies for different branches of science. It does not mean most of, and it does not mean all of. Doran and Zimmerman cut the number of respondees back to 79, who had actively published in climate science, of 75 of whom said yes to both. In actual fact, 75 out of 79 is not 97%, it's actually 94%. This is actually an error in Doran and Zimmerman's maths. But the fact is that 75 scientists were those that were taken to give you this figure of 97%. 75 out of 6 million in the world. That is not a consensus. And not only that, they weren't even asked if it's a crisis. All they said was, it's warmed, man has played a part. So, what do scientists actually think? Well, here's a petition from a long time ago called the Oregon Petition Project. Over 30,000 scientists have signed this, and it says there is no convincing scientific evidence that the human release of CO2, methane or other GH gases is causing or will cause in the foreseeable future catastrophic heating of the Earth's atmosphere and disruption of the climate. There is considerable evidence that the effects will be beneficial. There's a group called Clintel based in Holland who have released 2 letters to the UN in 2019-2022. The first one signed by 500, second one signed by 1100. Actually, they've got some more signatures since then. It's actually now 1400. There is no climate emergency. This is what scientists actually think. So how about CO2 and temperature? On the right, on this graph, we have CO2 today, down at 400 ppm. In the past, it's been as high, in this particular chart here, 60 million years, up to 2,000 ppm. Us primates, we evolved at 50 million years ago. Many of today's plants did as well. Many of today's crustaceans did. Oysters, for example, are over 100 million years old, as are sharks. The upper graph shows temperature. As you can see, it was 5 to 10 degrees warmer when we evolved, as did many of the plants on Earth. As you can see by the values on the far right, today it is very, very cold and there's very, very low CO2. We are in a situation where there is actually a lack of CO2 on planet Earth, and much of life is used to much higher levels of CO2. And we know this because 97% or so of the plants on Earth today, they're called C3 plants, evolved during these periods of high CO2. So, what we see today when we expose plants today to higher levels of CO2 is much higher plant growth. Top left, we have a pine tree. Ambient, when this experiment was done, was probably about 350. So it's 350 ppm is the baseline. Add 150, that's how much it grows. Almost double it, that's how much it grows. Add 450, that's how much it grows. Plants like CO2. Plants like warming. Top right is a study by NASA. They have satellites in space called LAI satellites that measure the leaf area index of plants. This was from the 1980s to 2015. And as you can see, the planet is roughly about 20-25% greener. There are some areas of deforestation in red. This is the effect of chainsaws and the effect of man cutting down trees for industry. Bottom left, this is the effect of warming on global precipitation. A 4% increase globally on average, some areas slightly drier, some slightly wetter. This also helps plant growth. On the right is global cereal yield. So all cereals, as you can see, many areas doing much better. Crop yields are up. Part of that increase in crop yields is also due to the increase in CO2. Plants like CO2, plants like warmth. There was a period recently called the Holocene climatic optimum, which was roughly about 2 or 3 degrees C warmer globally. The warming seemed to have been concentrated in the northern hemisphere, so the Alps, Scotland, the Arctic, the far north was possibly 5 or 6 degrees warmer than today. During this time, the Sahara was green. We know this because they've put radar through the sand and they've found old riverbeds there. They've also found rock paintings of giraffes and so on, and they can tell by the sand sediments on the southwest coast of that part of Africa that the sand has only been blowing off that part of the coast, because that's the direction of the prevailing wind there, fairly recently. So before that there was no sand. Bottom left, this is a glacier retreat up north, Iceland, Sweden, Alaska, places like that, Greenland, and they're exposing long dead trees, forests. These are the trees that grew many thousands of years ago during this Holocene climatic optimum. And today these trees grow 300 miles to the south. That's how much warmer it was then. Top right, Scotland had a Mediterranean climate. That's probably quite a few degrees warmer. They know this by looking at the silt beds from Loch Ness. Bottom right, glacial growth in the last 12,000 years across the world. Northern hemisphere red, southern hemisphere blue. As you can see, we are currently near the highest extent of glacial growth, being the Little Ice Age in 1700. And if you can see, if you compare that to back between, say, 11,000 and 5,000 BC, glacial growth, apart from the Younger Dryas, which is that period at 8,000 BC, was much less than it is today. We are near the coldest it has been on Earth in the last 10,000 years. So, we're also told that climate change, warming, affects extreme weather. Top left is accumulated cyclone energy globally from NOAA, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration in America. The accumulated cyclone energy is not increasing. Top right, strong tornadoes, decreasing. Bottom figure, wildfires in the US, decreasing. You might have heard of the very hot period in the 30s in America, when much of it was desert, or a lot of it became desert farmland. It was a very dry, very warm period in the US, a lot more wildfires. Wildfires have decreased. Alarmism does not constitute evidence. Hard facts do, and there is no evidence to suggest that warming and CO2 is dangerous for the planet. The supposed solution to climate change, wind turbines and solar panels, is not an environmental solution. This top picture is wind turbine blades chopped up and dumped in landfill. That little yellow thing is a big bulldozer. That's how vast it is. That big patch of white dust is cut up fiberglass because these blades are cut up. This stuff is terrible. It gets in your lungs. It's like asbestos. It's really nasty. You can't recycle fiberglass. The best you can do is something called pyrolysis, which is where you cook it up at high temperature. You produce something like natural gas, which you can burn, a black sludge, and glass fibres, which you can use in concrete. That's not recycling. That's called trying to get rid of it. And as you can clearly see, that isn't done because here it is in landfill. Putting plastics in landfill is not an environmental solution. Solar panels. Huge quantities of toxic metals in them. Here we see them dumped, broken up, leaching those toxic metals into the ground. I believe there is one recycling plant in France, in the entire world, that can recycle solar panels. It's very expensive to do so. And this is why it isn't done. Once the cost of recycling that is, of course, added to the cost of the installation and onto the cost of electricity, you end up with much more expensive electricity. In the meantime, burning natural gas, all that produces is plant food, which makes the planet greener, which we know about. And wind turbines don't blow. We know what happened in September in 2021 when the wind died and electricity prices went up 250% year ahead, 700% day ahead, when many electric companies went under because they were trapped between the cap, the amount they could charge to the end user, and the increase in the cost to them from the wind turbines. About 20 companies went under. The increase in cost of electricity in the UK is having a catastrophic effect on our economy and on people's household income. Going back to the medieval, where we relied on wind power to produce bread, is not a viable solution. It is not the way ahead. There is a better way of doing this. And that future, if you want to get off CO2, nuclear. It's the only one we have that can deliver baseload 24/7 power on demand. And while we have many small medium reactors on order from Rolls-Royce and big nuclear power plants on their way, which will take 10 years or so, the SMRs from Rolls-Royce take about 4 or 5 years to commission. The only viable solution until those come in is to burn gas. Wind turbines and solar panels don't work. And of course, trying to cut CO2 is actually a pointless task, because don't forget that every other country is producing CO2 as well. And many of those countries, India, China, Pakistan, the Middle East, South America, Africa, some, don't care about our CO2 cutting fantasy we have. So whatever we do, CO2 will go up past 500, 600 ppm. And if we get any impacts from that on our weather, we're going to get those anyway. So by far the most effective solution is to adapt to the impacts of climate change and not to try to stop it, because then we can spend the money where and when it is needed. Be it a dam in Africa, be it a seawall in Lincolnshire. It is much cheaper, much more effective to do that.
This video has expressed our initial response to the Torbay Climate Emergency Plan by 7 concerned citizens, supported by 200 or so peaceful and informed demonstrators outside the building where the meeting took place. We represent the views of a growing movement of awakening people across the region, nation and internationally. We must continue to question the science, politics and agendas, and then take the necessary actions. Thank you for staying with us and listening to the videos.